Hello Internet, it's Matt here for the Dork Lords. If you're new to the channel, welcome. We talk about all manner of dorkly things here, so whether it's sci-fi, fantasy, superheroes. There's my cat. Alright, boo-boo. Thanks for the assist, Kittalor. Alright, as I was saying, whether it's sci-fi, fantasy, superheroes, we probably have a playlist about it. Feel free to check us out. Today is another in our Dork Lord of the Rings segments. And today is the conclusion to the two-part video series about Feanor, the Exiled Elven King. Before we start, I just wanted to mention I got an excellent question from commenter Feanor Felagund. I can only assume it's the Feanor Felagund. And Feanor asked me how to pronounce the W umlaut E letter combination. I had the same question years ago, looked up a passage on pronunciation, and I thought I had the answer, that it should be pronounced ve, as in manve and fienve. But in answering Finrod's question, I couldn't find that passage. And in fact, I found a contradictory quote. So, unless I eventually find that mysterious passage, I'm going to start pronouncing the W umlaut E as way, as in manwe and fienwe. Thank you, Finrod. I appreciate that. Okay, just to sum up where we left off in part 1. Feanor crafts many wondrous objects during the years of the trees, before the First Age, including the most powerful artifacts in Tolkien's lore, the 3 Silmarils. He's the son of Finwë, king of the Noldor elves. And he has 2 younger half-brothers with whom he does not get along, Fingolfin and Finarfin. In fact, he publicly threatens Fingolfin with a sword, which gets him in hot water with the Valar. Eventually, the 2 elves make up, and notably, Fingolfin publicly vows, "Thou shalt lead, and I will follow." Put a pin in that comment. Meanwhile, Melkor is busy being evil. Of course, he and Ungoliant, the giant spider, drain the light from the 2 trees of Valinor, leaving the land in darkness. The Valar can't just whip up another couple of trees, but they do come up with a solution. Silmarils contain the light of the trees of Valinor. So, the Valar ask Feanor if they can take the light from the Silmarils and essentially jumpstart the 2 trees. Feanor thinks about it and decides he can't part with the Silmarils. Tough luck, Amon stays in darkness. During that same meeting, messengers arrived to tell Feanor and the Valar that Melkor broke into Formenos, Feanor's fortress, killed Finwë, Feanor's dad, and stole the Silmarils. Feanor is enraged at both Melkor and the Valar. He names Melkor Morgoth, the black foe of the world. With Finwë dead, Feanor is now king of the Noldor. He heads to the elven city of Tirion, makes an impassioned speech. He insults the Valar and urges the Noldor to fetch their swords and head with him to Middle-earth, to take back the Silmarils from Morgoth and conquer the lands of Middle-earth. Then, just to make it official, he and his 7 sons make an oath, vowing to pursue with vengeance and hatred to the ends of the world anyone, including Valar, who keeps a Silmaril from their possession. And that's where we left off. So, Feanor, the new king, just given this fiery, half-crazed speech saying, "Leave your homes and follow me to Middle-earth." But it's still a question as to whether his people are going to follow him. At the moment, it's just Feanor and his sons that have committed to this ill-advised plan. Oh, I've been asked to cite the chapters I'm reading from. So, this next quote is from Silmarillion, Chapter 9, The Flight of the Noldor. At length, after long debate, Feanor prevailed, and the greater part of the Noldor there assembled he set aflame with the desire of new things and strange countries. Therefore, when Finarfin spoke yet again for heed and delay, a great shout went up, "Nay, let us be gone!" And straightway Feanor and his sons began to prepare for the marching forth. Little foresight could there be for those who dared to take so dark a road. Yet all was done in overhaste, for Feanor drove them on, fearing lest in the cooling of their hearts his words should wane, and other counsels yet prevail. And for all his proud words, he did not forget the power of the Valar. But from Valmar no message came, and Manwë was silent. He would not yet either forbid or hinder Feanor's purpose, for the Valar were aggrieved that they were charged with evil intent to the Eldar, or that any were held captive by them against their will. Now they watched and waited, for they did not yet believe that Feanor could hold the host of the Noldor to his will. And indeed, when Feanor began the marshalling of the Noldor for their setting out, then at once dissension arose. For though he had brought the assembly in a mind to depart, by no means all were of a mind to take Feanor as king. Greater love was given to Fingolfin and his sons, and his household and the most part of the dwellers in Tirion refused to renounce him if he would go with them. And thus at the last, as two divided hosts, the Noldor set forth upon their bitter road. Feanor and his following were in the van, but the greater host came behind under Fingolfin, and he marched against his wisdom, because Fingon his son so urged him, and because he would not be sundered from his people that were eager to go, nor leave them to the rash counsels of Feanor. Nor did he forget his words before the throne of Manwë. That last line is very important. Nor did he forget his words before the throne of Manwë. That last line is very important. Nor did he forget his words before the throne of Manwë. That's Fingolfin remembering his "thou shalt lead and I will follow" vow to Feanor. So, he lives up to his vow, he follows, and the bulk of the Noldor, who value Fingolfin's words over Feanor, get in line behind Fingolfin. Note how Feanor is trying to hit the road before his people have a chance to think about it, right? Fearing lest in the cooling of their hearts his words should wane. And the Valar are slow to intercede because they don't think the Noldor are going to follow Feanor's crazy plan. But once Fingolfin commits, the die is cast. Now the Valar are going to try to put a stop to this, but it's too little, too late. This is also from the Silmarillion, Chapter 9, Flight of the Noldor. But even as the trumpet sang and Feanor issued from the gates of Tirion, a messenger came at last from Manwë, saying, "Go not forth, for the hour is evil, and your road leads to sorrow that ye do not foresee. No aid will the Valar lend you in this quest, but neither will they hinder you. For this ye shall know, as ye came hither freely, freely shall ye depart. But thou, Feanor, Finwë's son, by thine oath art exiled. The lies of Melkor thou shalt unlearn in bitterness. Vala he is, thou sayest, then thou hast sworn in vain. For none of the Valar canst thou overcome, now or ever. Not though Eru, who thou namest, had made thee thrice greater than thou art." But Feanor laughed, and spoke not to the herald, but to the Noldor, saying, "So, then will this valiant people set forth the heir of their king alone into banishment with his sons only, and return to their bondage? But if any will come with me, I say to them, is sorrow foreboded to you? But in Aman we have seen it. In Aman we have come through bliss to woe. The other now we will try, through sorrow to find joy, or freedom at the least." Then turning to the herald, he cried, "Say this to Manwë, high king of Arda. If Feanor cannot overthrow Morgoth, at least he delays not to assail him, and sits not idle in grief. And it may be that Eru has set in me a fire greater than thou knowest. Such hurt at the least will I do to the foe of the Valar, that even the mighty in the Ring of Doom shall wonder to hear it. Yea, in the end, they will follow me. Farewell." In that hour the voice of Feanor grew so great and so potent that even the herald of the Valar bowed before him as one full answered, and departed. And the Noldor were overruled. Therefore they continued their march, and the house of Feanor hastened before them along the coasts of Elendë, Not once did they turn their eyes back to Tyrion. Some fiery dialogue. And yet another example of Feanor treating the Valar like peers. His arrogance is on full display. So, Manwë's herald tells Feanor that due to his oath, in which he vowed to attack anyone, even the Valar, if they withheld the Silmarils from him, Feanor is hereby banished. And you can tell that Manwë is pissed at Feanor's threat, saying, "You wouldn't stand a chance against us even if you were 3 times as powerful a being." And Feanor does kind of what he did when he slammed the door in Melkor's face back in part 1. Instead of answering the herald, he speaks past him, addressing his people. Then he turns to the herald and says basically, okay, yeah, maybe I can't beat Morgoth, but at least I'm doing something instead of sitting around sulking like the Valar. And off they go towards Middle-earth. But there's an obstacle that's coming up fast, and that's a whole bunch of water between them and their destination. Feanor is about to make the most villainous act of his life. Oh, you think I can't condemn an entire elven society to a lifetime of misery and regret? Hold my elven ale. This is also from chapter 9 of the Silmarillion. Now Feanor led the Noldor northward, because his first purpose was to follow Morgoth. Moreover, ever northward the sundering seas grew narrower, as the wasteland of Ahriman and the coasts of Middle-earth drew together. But as the mind of Feanor cooled and took counsel, he perceived overlate that all these great companies would never overcome the long leagues to the north, nor cross the seas at the last, save with the aid of ships. Yet it would need long time and toil to build so great a fleet, even were there any among the Noldor skilled in that craft. He resolved now, therefore, to persuade the Teleri, ever friends to the Noldor, to join with them. And in his rebellion, he thought that thus the bliss of Valinor might be further diminished, and his power for war upon Morgoth be increased. He hastened then to Alqualande, and spoke to the Teleri as he had spoken before in Tyrion. But the Teleri were unmoved by aught that he could say. They were grieved indeed at the going of their kinsfolk and long friends, but would rather dissuade them than aid them. And no ship would they lend, nor help in the building against the will of the Valar. As for themselves, they desired now no other home but the strands of Eldamar, and no other lord than Olwe, prince of Alqualande. And he had never lent ear to Morgoth, nor welcomed him to his land. And he trusted still that Ulmo and the other great among the Valar would redress the hurts of Morgoth, and that the night would pass yet to a new dawn. Then Feanor grew wrathful, for he still feared delay, and hotly he spoke to Olwe. "You renounce your friendship, even in the hour of our need," he said. "Yet you were glad indeed to receive our aid when you came at last to these shores, faint-hearted loiterers, and well-nigh empty-handed. In huts on the beaches would you be dwelling still, had not the Noldor carved out your haven and toiled upon your walls." But Olwe answered, "We renounce no friendship, but it may be the part of a friend to rebuke a friend's folly. And when the Noldor welcomed us and gave us aid, otherwise then you spoke. In the land of Aman we were to dwell forever as brothers, whose houses stand side by side. But as for our white ships, those you gave us not. We learned not that craft from the Noldor, but from the lords of the sea. And the white timbers we wrought with our own hands, and the white sails were woven by our wives and our daughters. Therefore we will neither give them nor sell them for any league or friendship. For I say to you, Feanor, son of Finwë, these are to us as are the gems of the Noldor, the work of our hearts, whose like we shall not make again." Thereupon Feanor left him and sat in dark thought beyond the walls of Alqualande, until his host was assembled. When he judged that his strength was enough, he went to the haven of the swans and began to man the ships that were anchored there, and to take them away by force. But the Teleri withstood him, and cast many of the Noldor into the sea. Then swords were drawn, and a bitter fight was fought upon the ships, and about the lamplit quays and the piers of the haven. Thrice the people of Feanor were driven back, and many were slain upon either side. But the vanguard of the Noldor were succored by Fingon and the foremost of the host of Fingolfin, who coming up found a battle joined, and their own king falling, and rushed in before they knew rightly the cause of the quarrel. Some thought indeed that the Teleri had sought to waylay the march of the Noldor at the bidding of the Valar. Thus at last the Teleri were overcome, and a great part of their mariners that dwelt in Alqualande were wickedly slain. It's the first kinslaying. There's going to be others, unfortunately, but this act puts the Noldor beyond forgiveness. And this is a great conversation between Olwe and Feanor. Olwe is one of the first elves to awaken in the years of the trees. He's the brother of Thingol, the Elven King over in Middle-earth, who's going to eventually hear about this event and hold a justifiable grudge against Feanor's sons. Feanor realizes the Teleri are not going to follow him like the Noldor. And they don't want to lend their ships to Feanor for a couple of reasons. One, as the quote says, it's against the will of the Valar, but also because the ships of the Teleri, some of the finest ships ever crafted in Tolkien's lore, are their life's work. As Olwe says, these are to us as are the gems of the Noldor, the work of our hearts, whose like we shall not make again. Now, if anyone in Tolkien's mythology could empathize with Olwe's position, it should be Feanor. Remember, in part 1, Feanor was the one being asked to lend his prized Silmarils to the Valar, and he refused. But when Olwe refuses Feanor on similar grounds, Feanor's having none of it. He tries to take the ships by force, and a battle ensues. Fingolfin's forces arrive on the scene, and they make a quick and incorrect assessment. Hey, it looks like the Valar ordered the Teleri to waylay us. Attack! They turn the tide. Many Teleri are slain, and Feanor commandeers the ships. As they continue onward, the Valar appear once again and lay a verbal smackdown on Feanor and the Noldor. This is also from Chapter 9 of the Silmarillion, a very popular chapter for this video. After they had marched for a great while in the unmeasured night, they came at length to the northern confines of the guarded realm. There they beheld suddenly a dark figure, standing high upon a rock that looked down upon the shore. Some say that it was Mandos himself, and no lesser herald of Manwë. And they heard a loud voice, solemn and terrible, that bade them stand and give ear. Then all halted and stood still, and from end to end of the hosts of the Noldor the voice was heard speaking the curse and prophecy, which is called the prophecy of the North, and the doom of the Noldor. Much it foretold in dark words, which the Noldor understood not, until the woes indeed after befell them. But all heard the curse that was uttered upon those that would not stay, nor seek the doom and pardon of the Valar. Tears unnumbered ye shall shed, and the Valar will fence Valinor against you, and shut you out, so that not even the echo of your lamentation shall pass over the mountains. On the house of Feanor the wrath of the Valar lieth from the west unto the uttermost east, and upon all that will follow them it shall be laid also. Their oath shall drive them, and yet betray them, and ever snatch away the very treasures that they have sworn to pursue. To evil end shall all things turn that they begin well, and by treason of kin unto kin, and the fear of treason, shall this come to pass. The dispossessed shall they be forever. Ye have spilled the blood of your kindred unrighteously, and have stained the land of Aman. For blood ye shall render blood, and beyond Aman ye shall dwell in death's shadow. For though Eru appointed to you to die not in Ea, and no sickness may assail you, yet slain ye may be, and slain ye shall be, by weapon and by torment and by grief. And your houseless spirits shall come then to Mandos. There long shall ye abide, and yearn for your bodies, and find little pity, though all whom ye have slain should entreat for you. And those that endure in Middle-earth, and come not to Mandos, shall grow weary of the world, as with a great burden, and shall wane and become as shadows of regret before the younger race that cometh after. The Valar have spoken. Then many quailed. But Feanor hardened his heart and said, We have sworn, and not lightly. This oath we will keep. We are threatened with many evils, and treason not least. But one thing is not said, that we shall suffer from cowardice, from cravens or the fear of cravens. Therefore I say that we will go on, and this doom I add. The deeds that we shall do shall be the matter of song until the last days of Arda. So here we have the doom of Mandos. And it appears that Mandos himself shows up to deliver this judgment. This is the Valar's reaction to the Noldor killing the Teleri for their ships. They crossed a moral line. And other than possibly the curse of Morgoth on the family of Húrin, a story for another time, this doom is the most severe sentence pronounced on any character in Tolkien's lore. There's some argument as to whether it's a curse or a prophecy. I think it's a mixture of both. I prefer to think of it as a prophecy, a foretelling, because I like my characters to have agency, free will, instead of being pawns walking on prearranged paths. But however you interpret it, the doom of Mandos spells a lifetime of pain and regret for the line of Feanor. And once their bodies eventually perish, their spirits will be condemned to dwell in the halls of Mandos, like a purgatory, never allowed to return to the world. But once again, proud Feanor has a parting shot for Mandos, saying, well, at least we're not cowards, and they're going to be singing songs about us. Again, treating the Valar like annoying neighbors instead of these angelic beings. And he's right about the songs. For one, his son Maglor will write a lament about the Noldor called the Noldolante. So on one trip, he's insulted a herald of the Valar, likely Mandos himself, and the leader of the Teleri, all to their faces. He's just poking fate with a stick. And now he's going to make a choice that indirectly leads to the death of quite a few Noldor elves. This is from the Silmarillion. You guessed it, Chapter 9. Therefore Feanor halted, and the Noldor debated what course they should now take. But they began to suffer anguish from the cold and the clinging mists through which no gleam of star could pierce. And many repented of the road, began to murmur, especially those that followed Fingolfin, cursing Feanor and naming him as the cause of all the woes of the Eldar. But Feanor, knowing all that was said, took counsel with his sons, and two courses only they saw to escape from Ahriman and come into Endor, by the straits or by ship. But the Helcaraxes they deemed impassable, whereas the ships were too few. Many had been lost upon their long journey, and there remained now not enough to bear across all the great host together. Yet none were willing to abide upon the western coast while others were ferried first. Already the fear of treachery was awake among the Noldor. Therefore, it came into the hearts of Feanor and his sons to seize all the ships and depart suddenly. For they had retained the mastery of the fleet since the Battle of the Haven, and it was manned only by those who had fought there and were bound to Feanor. And as though it came at his call, there sprang up a wind from the northwest, and Feanor slipped away secretly with all whom he deemed true to him, went aboard and put out to sea, and left Fingolfin in Ahriman. And since the sea was there narrow, steering east and somewhat south, he passed over without loss, and first of all the Noldor set foot once more upon the shores of Middle-earth. But when they were landed, Maedhros, the eldest of his sons, and on a time the friend of Fingon ere Morgoth's lies came between, spoke to Feanor, saying, Now what ships and rowers will you spare to return? And whom shall they bear hither first? Fingon, the valiant? Then Feanor laughed as one fey, and he cried, "None and none. What I have left behind I count now no loss. Needless baggage on the road it has proved. Let those that cursed my name curse me still, and whine their way back to the cages of the Valar. Let the ships burn." Then Maethras alone stood aside, but Feanor caused fire to be set to the white ships of the Teleri. So in that place, which was called Losgar, ended the fairest vessels that ever sailed the sea, in a great burning, bright and terrible. And Fingolfin and his people saw the light from afar, red beneath the clouds, and he knew that they were betrayed. This was the first fruits of the kinslaying and the doom of the Noldor. So Feanor hears the Noldor cursing his name, and he decides to screw them over. He secretly sails away with his sons and trusted followers, and despite Maethras' attempt to have the ships sent back for the others, Feanor burns the ships to the ground. It's interesting because I think this means that Feanor isn't 100% sure that his orders are going to be followed. As king, you'd think he could just say, "Hey, we're not going back, leave the ships." And those ships might even be useful to him along the coasts of Middle-earth. But instead, he destroys them. I think it's to keep anyone, for example, Maethras, from secretly sending the ships back. And he does so with fire, a connection perhaps to his name, Feanor, Spirit of Fire. I said this leads to quite a few deaths, and that's because Fingolfin doesn't turn back. Instead, he journeys by land across that Hel Caraxes, the grinding ice, the route Feanor deemed impassable, and many elves die along the way. So, now that Feanor has completely rejected the Valar and their warnings, and made his way to Middle-earth, what are the Valar thinking back in Aman? This quote is from the Silmarillion, chapter 11, of the sun and moon and the hiding of Valinor. "And they mourned not more for the death of the trees than for the marring of Feanor. Of the works of Melkor, one of the most evil. For Feanor was made the mightiest in all parts of body and mind, in valor, in endurance, in beauty, in understanding, in skill, in strength, and in subtlety alike, of all the children of Iluvatar." High praise. "And a bright flame was in him, the works of wonder for the glory of Arda, that he might otherwise have wrought, only Manwë might in some measure conceive. And it was told by the Vanyar who held vigil with the Valar, that when the messengers declared to Manwë the answers of Feanor to his heralds, Manwë wept and bowed his head. But at that last word of Feanor, that at the least the Noldor should do deeds to live in song forever, he raised his head as one that hears a voice far off, and he said, 'So shall it be. Dear bought those songs shall be accounted, and yet shall be well bought, for the price could be no other. Thus, even as Eru spoke to us, shall beauty not before conceived be brought into Ea, and evil yet be good to have been.' But Mandos said, 'And yet remain evil. To me, Feanor comes soon.'" So this passage really spells out how special Feanor is. All those superlatives strung out together. He was supposed to be the best of the children of Iluvatar. When weighing Melkor's evil acts, the Valar see the fall of Feanor as equal to the death of the trees. That's how monumental Feanor's betrayal is. And Manwë says, hey, maybe Feanor's betrayal will ultimately create beauty in the world. Maybe goodness can come out of this evil act. And Mandos replies, yeah, but don't expect Feanor to have an epiphany. He's coming to me soon. Meaning, he's about to die. This is a longer quote about the end of Feanor's life. It's from the Silmarillion, chapter 13, The Return of the Noldor. It has been told that Feanor and his sons came first of the exiles to Middle-earth and landed in the waste of Lamoth, the great echo. And even as the Noldor set foot upon the strand, their cries were taken up into the hills and multiplied, so that a clamor as of countless mighty voices filled all the coasts of the north. And the noise of the burning of the ships at Loskar went down the winds of the sea as a tumult of great wrath. And far away all who heard that sound were filled with wonder. Now the flames of that burning were seen not only by Fingolfin, whom Feanor had deserted in Ahriman, but also by the orcs and the Watchers of Morgoth. No tale has told what Morgoth thought in his heart at the tidings that Feanor, his bitterest foe, had brought a host out of the west. It may be that he feared him little, for he had as yet no proof of the swords of the Noldor, and soon it was seen that he purposed to drive them back into the sea. Under the cold stars, before the rising of the moon, the host of Feanor came at length to the long lake of Mithrim, and upon its northern shore made their encampment. But the host of Morgoth, aroused by the tumult of Lamoth and the light of the burning at Loskar, came through the passes of the mountains of shadow and assailed Feanor on a sudden, before his camp was full wrought or put in defense. And there on the grey fields of Mithrim was fought the second battle in the wars of Beleriand. Dagger Nuin Gileath it is named, the battle under stars, for the moon had not yet risen. And it is renowned in song. The Noldor, outnumbered and taken at unawares, were yet swiftly victorious, for the light of Aman was not yet dimmed in their eyes, and they were strong and swift and deadly in anger, and their swords were long and terrible. The orcs fled before them, and they were driven forth from Mithrim with great slaughter, and hunted over the mountains of shadow. Evil indeed were the tidings that came at last to Angband, and Morgoth was dismayed. 10 days that battle lasted, and from it returned of all the hosts that he had prepared for the conquest of Beleriand, no more than a handful of leaves. Yet cause he had for great joy, though it was hidden from him for a while. For Feanor, in his wrath against the enemy, would not halt, but pressed on behind the remnant of the orcs, thinking so to come at Morgoth himself. And he laughed aloud as he wielded his sword, rejoicing that he had dared the wrath of the Valar and the evils of the road, that he might see the hour of his vengeance. Nothing did he know of Angband, or the great strength of defense that Morgoth had so swiftly prepared. But even had he known, it would not have deterred him, for he was fey, consumed by the flame of his own wrath. Thus it was that he drew far ahead of the van of his host, and seeing this, the servants of Morgoth turned to bay, and there issued from Angband Balrogs to aid them. There upon the confines of the land of Morgoth, Feanor was surrounded, with few friends about him. Long he fought on, and undismayed, though he was wrapped in fire, and wounded with many wounds. And at the last he was smitten to the ground by Gothmog, lord of Balrogs, whom Ecthelion after slew in Gondolin. There he would have perished, had not his sons in that moment come up with force to his aid. And the Balrogs left him, and departed to Angband. Then his sons raised up their father, and bore him back towards Mithrim. But as they were upon the upward path to the pass over the mountains, Feanor bade them halt, for his wounds were mortal, and he knew that his hour was come. And with his last sight he beheld far off the peaks of Thangorodrim, mightiest of the towers of Middle-earth, and knew, with the foreknowledge of death, that no power of the Noldor would ever overthrow them. But he cursed the name of Morgoth thrice, and laid it upon his sons to hold to their oath, to avenge their father. Then he died, but he had neither burial nor tomb, for so fiery was his spirit, that as it sped his body fell to ash, and was borne away like smoke. And his likeness has never again appeared in Arda, neither has his spirit left the halls of Mandos. Thus ended the mightiest of the Noldor, of whose deeds came both their greatest renown and their most grievous woe. Not that I have to tell you, but I love Tolkien's writing, This passage is so evocative, so cinematic. It tells this rich, complex story in a matter of a few paragraphs. Feanor dies battling several Balrogs, including Gothmog, Lord of Balrogs. And it's his pride and overconfidence that gets him in the end. He dies at the end of a 10-day battle that he's won decisively. The battle under stars. He's just so intent on chasing down his fleeing opponents that he outruns his army. And we see another connection to Feanor's name, Spirit of Fire. When he dies, his body dramatically turns to ash, and his spirit flies away like smoke, where it still lingers in the halls of Mandos. And note that it's the burning of the ships that attracts the attention of the orcs that leads to the battle that results in Feanor's death. The doom of Mandos comes to pass, but the unjust acts of Feanor help to bring it about. The burning of the ships. Feanor's sons are there as he lays dying. And it's his last act that I find perhaps the most egregious, difficult as that is to believe. It says that he looks out at Morgoth's stronghold, and he realizes that the Noldor will never overthrow Morgoth. But with his last breath, he still demands that his sons hold to their oaths. He might have freed them, seeing at this last moment that the oath is impossible to fulfill. But he doesn't. He condemns his sons to a futile existence. I suppose the doom of Mandos had already foretold that, but Feanor makes it perfectly clear right before he dies. Avenge me! Poof! Note that Feanor lands in the wastes of Lamoth, the Great Echo. That region is where Ungoliant attacked Morgoth to get the Silmarils, almost defeated him before the Balrogs bailed him out. Supposedly Morgoth cried in anguish during this fight with Ungoliant, and those cries can still be heard echoing through Lamoth. So Feanor, Morgoth, and the Silmarils are all associated with that region. And there's an interesting connection between Feanor and Galadriel that I wanted to touch on. In the Unfinished Tales, we get this illuminating passage. This is from Chapter 4 of Unfinished Tales, The History of Galadriel and Celeborn. Galadriel was the greatest of the Noldor, except Feanor maybe, though she was wiser than he, and her wisdom increased with the long years. Even among the Eldar she was accounted beautiful, and her hair was held a marvel unmatched. It was golden like the hair of her father, and of her foremother Indis, but richer and more radiant, for its gold was touched by some memory of the star-like silver of her mother. And the Eldar said that the light of the two trees, Laurelin and Telperion, had been snared in her tresses. Many thought that this saying first gave to Feanor the thought of imprisoning and blending the light of the trees that later took shape in his hands as the Silmarils. For Feanor beheld the hair of Galadriel with wonder and delight. He begged 3 times for a tress, but Galadriel would not give him even one hair. These two kinsfolk, the greatest of the Eldar of Valinor, were unfriends forever. So Galadriel unfriended Feanor. Elven Facebook. And this passage is great. We get the sense of how powerful Galadriel is, similar in power to Feanor, and how important she ultimately is to the Noldor. Her actions during the War of the Ring actually allow her to be pardoned, escape the doom of Mandos, and return to the West. We learn that it's the light in her hair that gives Feanor the idea for crafting the Silmarils. And he asks her for a lock of her hair 3 times, getting rejected each time. Seems a bit creepy, frankly. This actually connects to the events of the Lord of the Rings, when Gimli asks for a lock of Galadriel's hair. She responds by giving him 3. I think this is Galadriel's way of saying that Gimli is more deserving of this request than Feanor, the greatest of the Noldor elves. Feanor wanted the hair for himself, his own fascination. Gimli says that he wants to use it as a pledge of goodwill between dwarves and elves until the end of days. It's not for him. It's for the unity of the peoples of Middle-earth. It's a cool callback to the Elder Days, reminding us just how long Galadriel's been around. So there you have it, Feanor, the best and worst of elvenkind. Uniquely skilled, brilliant, but done in by his own pride. And his actions carried a tragic legacy that echoed through the elves and Middle-earth for thousands of years. Truly one of the most notable characters in Tolkien's mythology. And thanks, Christian, for recommending this topic. Before I go, I just wanted to show you the cool gift that I got from my wife this Christmas. If you remember, previously my wife had gotten me a Lord of the Rings script signed by the cast. Well, this time I got a really cool Witch King Funko Pop. Oh yeah. he's on a fell beast, detachable, can come and get stabbed in the face. Very, very cool. So from me and the Witch King, farewell everyone. Until next time. Bye.